Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Weekly Notice with Andy Ngo. Today is the 15th of September, and we are on episode 25. Please leave your questions and comments for me throughout this live stream, and I'll get to them later on in the show. I do read your comments throughout the show, so I really do appreciate the feedback that you give me in this live program. Um, Last week, I talked about the breaking news of the death of the Queen of the United Kingdom. And today, we're still in the UK in the official 10-day mourning period. There's been a number of events to commemorate the life of the Queen. And um, I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. Um, yeah. So this is a queen, the photograph of the queen when she was in her 20s, in the 50s. Um, I know for a lot of Americans, they might find the subject and the person and the monarchy, the British monarchy, quite irrelevant. Irrelevant given American history and the fact that America fought a war to separate from the king at the time. Um, and you see the sentiment represented, um, uh, obviously, on the left, but also on the right as well. A lot of American patriots and conservatives also feel this. I understand why. It's really part of the American identity to be anti monarchist. There are a number of countries that have broken away from the crown who feel that way as well. Ireland is the Republic of Ireland is an example. But the reason why, um, uh, in a bit more about some of the events that have happened since the Queen's passing. So her body and coffin for most of the days have been actually in Scotland. It was in Edinburgh for a certain time, and it just a few days ago was moved down to London, and there was a procession throughout the streets from. Uh, Her body was first taken to Buckingham Palace, which was the official royal residence, and then there was a procession um, yesterday that took the coffin to Westminster Palace, which is also where the Parliament is. And the symbolism behind that is that the royal family now is handing over the Queen, the late Queen, to the state, to the people. And so, since yesterday, there's been an ongoing 24-hour um, event at Westminster where people are lining up to get their opportunity to see her coffin, and the line is miles long. Literally, last night at 3 a.m., I checked, it was about 3 miles long at 3 a.m. So people are queuing for upwards of 6, 7, 8 hours to be able to get their chance to say goodbye to Her Majesty. And the reason why she's so important to so many people here, and with that caveat, there's a minority who want the monarchy to be abolished because I guess, like many Americans, they view it's an antiquated institution. The idea of having a ruler seems antiquated. It seems, and there's also misconceptions. I think many Americans, probably similarly to Meghan Markle in this way, viewed that a life becoming a royal is that of luxury and being a celebrity and having servants and living in castles. That's really an incorrect perception. The reason why the Queen was so beloved by so many, not just within the UK, but also around the world, and you can see the show of respect from both left wing and right wing politicians around the world. I mean, Biden's going to the funeral on Monday. but also Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil. He's called far right. He called for 3 days of mourning in Brazil. But the reason why the queen is beloved is because she dedicated her life to service to her country and people. And that's what people don't really quite outsiders don't really quite understand about the role of the monarch. It's not about yes, she is the ruler of the nation, but her role as somebody who doesn't have political power in a constitutional monarchy is to serve the people. So for decades, a lot of what the Queen did, in addition to welcoming heads of states to Britain, was also doing things like opening up hospitals, schools in really remote areas of the UK that a lot of nobody has ever gone to. And these are not particularly glamorous activities. And with that, being a serving royal is you lose your voice. You may remember Meghan Markle when she did the Oprah interview last year. She says something like, "I was silenced." You are silenced because when you are in a constitutional monarchy and you're part of the family or you are the monarch, the people don't need to hear your political opinions and they shouldn't hear your political opinions and you should not influence the political process. And that's actually very stifling. And for decades, she served her country well and lived up to that role. Prince Charles, now King Charles, is much less popular because, through all these decades that he's been the heir to the throne, he's been very vocal about a number of issues, particularly around globalism and uh, uh, um, green energy and things like that. And many of his critics who are supportive of the monarchy find that that was deeply inappropriate. He's taken on a new role now, and it's only been days. We'll see. But the queen for the British people in many ways is like what maybe the flag is for Americans, except it's for them, for the British, it's personified within the role of a person who's seen as like a grandmotherly figure. So you know, and this will, probably be the last that I'll talk about the Queen. But I just thought, like for conservatives, there are certain traditions and things that are part of American history that are really valuable that you see many people on the left just want to discard. They feel like, why keep this? Why keep that? Why keep these aspects of religion? And you know, I the fact that the monarchy in Britain has sustained itself for this duration of time and has been able to change with the times, but being able to keep on to what's important. I think that's why it's quite meaningful to a lot of people. And for me as an outsider, there's an admiration, I think, for that, for a woman who served through, I think there were 15 prime ministers that she's seen, 14 U.S. presidents. Just think of that time frame in public, in a time of service, and yeah. So I'm just trying to contextualize why she's so beloved to so many, because it can look puzzling if, let's say, you're in America and you never been to the UK, have no interest in its history, anything like that. It may look like such a antiquated institution, but it serves a really important role in unifying past generations to the present and also unifying the country together. And um, so that's why uh, hundreds of thousands of people will wait in line for their chance to say their final goodbye. Monday is the official state funeral with all the heads of states and other people coming into London, and then she will be taken to a resting place where she will be. Her tomb will be next to her late husband, who died last year, Prince Philip. Okay. I would love to hear your questions and comments on the monarchy throughout here, but yeah, it's deserving of respect when you understand it, and particularly of the Queen and her particular choices that she made throughout her time in serving her country. Okay, So I and libs of TikTok and a teenager named Chloe Cole, a detransitioning teen, we were targeted in a really bizarre way by an unhinged trans journalist named Dawn Ennis. Um, so Dawn Ennis, this is the person's photograph. Dawn Dawn is the person's name now. Prior name was also Dawn, spelled Don. She has had a very long career in legacy media. She was a producer for a very long time at ABC News before she was fired. I'll talk about that in a bit. But so this is her Twitter profile, or was, I should say. It's changed in the last few hours. If you look at this banner, she posted a picture of Chloe Cole in the middle here. That's the teenager who had a mastectomy at 15 and has now spoken out about her deep regret for making medical changes to her body when she um, mistakenly was diagnosed as somebody who is trans. There's a photo of me here during the middle of a assault in 2019 by Antifa, in which you can't see it in here because my face is soaked with the white, all the drinks that were thrown on me. But I was bleeding from my on my face and my ears, and nearly died from a brain hemorrhage. I was hospitalized shortly after this photo. And then there's a screenshot of libs of TikTok, and then a quote at the top: "I condone any slash all violence." I don't know what Dawn Ennis wanted to suggest here. I find this very disturbing because it seems to be a suggestion of violence against myself and Chloe and libs of TikTok. Dawn Ennis is a freelance writer now after um, she was fired from her establishment legacy media career. So she contributes to a number of places like Daily Beast and Forbes and Los Angeles Blade, which is a left-wing LGBT news site. Um, so yeah, so that's the picture she uses on her account. This is a picture of her in a wig. Um, she has a bit of a history. It's I guess you could say bizarre. I'm gonna pull up the Daily Mail report from 2014. So here we go. ABC producer who changed gender 3 times is fired weeks after latest transformation for performance-related issues. So Dawn Ennis has been in the media. This the photo on the right was when she was a man named Don Ennis, Don, and uh, as Don Ennis, he fathered 3 children. Now, as Dawn Dawn Ennis, she identifies as their mother, um, which you don't often see actually with trans people who have created children. They don't, for example, if a trans woman, by that I mean was prior a man living as a man, fathered children, he we don't often see that person in their trans identity identify as a mother. I just thought that was quite interesting because the children had a mother. The mother is deceased, but um, anyways, Dawn Ennis, you may have heard of her because she was in a viral video last year. Let me pull it up. Um, yeah. So this was recorded by Madeline Kearns. So this was it wasn't last year, it was this year, March of 2022. Madeline Kearns is a staff writer with National Review Online. You should follow her if you don't. She does really good writing. So she went to the NCAA swim finals in Atlanta, and that was one of the events where the trans swimmer performed very well against biological women. So Dawn Ennis was there. She's the person on the left here. And the woman on the right is a British women's rights activist. She's disparaged by her critics as a TERF. A TERF is an acronym, TERF. It stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. It's a slur used by people on the far left for women who are not supportive of the trans ideology, the belief that sex doesn't exist, that women's spaces and categories should not be protected because a woman is anybody who feels like it and can identify in and out of it. Anyways, they had an encounter here in Atlanta, and this clip went viral at the time, 1.8 million views. I'm just going to play it. So Dawn, the person who had that Twitter banner up about I condone all violence, and then my picture and the picture of Chloe Cole and a screenshot of Lives of TikTok. That's this person on the left here.
My girls and the other women I am with are very comfortable with me in the bathroom.
Well, fortunately, I'm not your daughter, and my daughter is also not your daughter.
Oh, that's right.
And she
So
would
she
feel. She would feel very uncomfortable. No, I
interrupt
right.
me.
No, you
excuse
interrupted
me.
me.
Excuse
You
me.
interrupted
I'm not
me.
here for a debate. Beth, do you mind?
Right.
I would ask you to please call off your dog.
I beg your pardon. I'm asking you as a mother. I'm asking you as a mother. Do not use female spaces.
And I'm very uncomfortable.
It makes women and girls
As a
feel
mother-
very uncomfortable.
as a mother,
you
I
are
am-
not. How dare you?
As
You
a
are
mother,
not a
I
mother.
am very.
You're not a You'll never birth your children. You are not a mother, Dawn.
Right,
I did the job of mom, which is
I
even
was
more
asking you the
Yeah,
basis
so
of
if you couldn't hear any of that, at one point Dawn says, can you get your dog on a leash, referring to the blonde women's rights activist on the right, Kelly J. Keene. And Dawn says, I am a mother at another point. So that's that person. She had since changed her Twitter cover banner back to the trans BLM pride flag. After I tweeted about it. Okay. Talking about some world news. Sweden had their elections on, I think was it Monday this week? Earlier this week. And the results have been shocking and unprecedented for Sweden. So Sweden, as you probably know, has a reputation for its cuddly liberalism. Infamously, they boast about having its like a feminist foreign policy agenda. For decades, they have welcomed in waves and waves of migrants and refugees. During the migrant crisis in Europe in 2015, 2016, Sweden per capita took the most of any country. Germany took the absolute most number of numbers, but for Sweden as a smaller country, per capita it took more. And throughout these decades of demographic changes, social changes, cultural changes, there have been the development of what are parallel societies. Sometimes they're inaccurately called no-go zones. I use the term parallel societies. And before I did reporting about Antifa, I used to write about migration and Islam. Sweden was one of the places I visited. I'm going to pull up my report from National Review back in late 2018 when they had another election at that time. So what was shocking about the election results this week in Sweden is that I mean, for decades, the Social Democrats have had dominance. Social Democrats is the main center left party. You can think of them as like the equivalent to maybe the Democrats in the US. Um, they've had dominance. And so, and their policy was that if you don't support immigration, you're a racist. And that discussions going back years were effectively quite shut down. Um, they had the aid of the media establishment and all that to help them with that particular narrative. But with the election this week, they narrowly lost their majority to a block of right wing parties that include the moderate party, which is center right. There's a liberal party, liberal lower L, not liberal in the American sense, liberal, which is like center right in the European context. And then, most importantly, the Sweden Democrats, which is often described in English language press as far right. The right wing populists is what they are. The Sweden Democrats got about 20% of the vote, and that's significant because just years ago, they were an insignificant party, and they had roots in far right politics that they've worked really hard to expunge to make themselves a legitimate mainstream party, and they've had success in that. That the success, I think, is in how their policies and messaging and membership has changed. I mean, they've kicked out people who they thought were too extreme. Some of those people have started, their own fringe rival party that have not really had any electoral success. But also the other thing is that there's just reality in Sweden that the liberals, by liberals, I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that term. It's confusing in this context. That the left, the mainstream left, have been unable to suppress anymore, which is the fact that Sweden, which was one of the safest countries in the world, is now one of the most dangerous in Europe. And they have routine bombings, shootings, gang killings, just unrest that take place primarily in migrant ghetto areas. Most of the migrant makeup is of those of Muslim background, but that is less relevant than you may think. So here's my National Review report. I'm going to pull it up. This is from late December 31st. Sweden's Parallel Society. So at that time, they had a national campaigning in 2018, and I wrote about my travels in Sweden, and I visited some of the most dangerous migrant areas in Stockholm and Malmö. You may remember that back in 2017, Tim Pool became actually quite well known when he took on a challenge by Paul Joseph Watson. Paul Joseph Watson offered $2,000 to any journalist to go investigate these so-called no-go zones of Sweden. And Tim Pool went at that time. So I went to some of the same areas that Tim Pool did, although I spent, I think, a bit more time than he did probably, and interviewed people, experts as well as locals and all that. And let me read from part of what I wrote. Okay. The closer the GPS told me I was to my destination, the more headscarves I saw and the less Swedish I heard. In Rosengård, youths gathered during school hours in streets and parks around the public housing that lined the neighborhood. In fact, fewer than half of ninth graders here passed enough classes to enroll in high school. 400 miles north, in the country's capital, I witnessed similar social phenomena in some Stockholm neighborhoods. I was more discreet on that trip. Journalists have been violently attacked in those areas. In Rinkeby, young girls and even some babies were dressed in modesty headscarves. Cafes were in practice male-only spaces, and a restaurant in the town center offered segregated seating with a curtain for families, a euphemism for women. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. So yeah, in this report, which went on National Review, I talk about the history of migration and the politics around migration in Sweden. Um, Here we go. Mhm. The visibility of conservative and fundamentalist Islamic norms are witnessed in vulnerable neighborhoods may not mean much by itself, but too often it is linked to violent extremism. A Syrian man who lived in Rosengård is currently in French custody for suspected involvement in both the 2015 Paris attacks and the 2016 Brussels bombings. And I go on and on talking about how hundreds of Swedish nationals traveled to the Middle East to join the Islamic State. In 2017, there was a terrorist attack by a jihadist from Uzbekistan. He was a failed asylum seeker, and he used a truck to plow through shoppers in Stockholm. 5 people were killed, including an 11-year-old girl. I walked through that shopping street, by the way. They have peace barriers now, barriers that are meant to keep off vehicles from these terror attacks. In Stockholm, the peace barriers were, if I recall, they were in the shape of an animal. I think it was a lion, if I remember correctly. But it's meant, it looks kind of just like a statue, but it's actually serving a, anti-terror perspective, or anti-terror purpose. Excuse me. Yeah. So, in the Swedish elections this week, so the bloc of right-wing parties did very well, shockingly well, and at the center of their campaigns was to talk about violence and criminality and crime linked to migrant areas. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I talked about there have been hundreds of bombings that have happened in Sweden. These are gang-related bombings, so they're not like, targeting crowds of people like in terror attacks. They're like, this is gang-related violence where bombs are used, grenades are used as a weapon. And so buildings get destroyed, apartments get blown up. And, in these shootings in these migrant areas, people get caught in the crossfire, including children. So it just, and this has been going on for a very, very long time. It just reached the boiling point, just slightly enough to tip the right-wing parties over. So they have to form a coalition to make a government, but the Swedish prime minister from the left-wing party, the Social Democrats, Magdalena Andersson, she resigned this week, resigned in disgrace because her party did not perform as well as everyone was expecting. Okay. I'm gonna drink some water. For those joining now, please leave your questions and comments for me. I'll get to them in the end. I appreciate it. I wonder what you think about what I've talked about so far. I've jumped around on topics. That's the nature of the show, though. Okay. So I have a report that was literally just published before this live stream went out. It went on the Daily Mail. So here it is. GoFundMe hosts fundraiser to keep Portland Antifa rioter out of jail. I'm often asked what happened to some of those few Antifa violent rioters who actually were prosecuted. There were a very small number of them. As you know, the overwhelming majority had their cases dismissed as a matter of policy by the left-wing district attorney in Portland, but a very small number, particularly ones who were so violent that their crimes couldn't be ignored, were prosecuted. and also prosecuted, I think, so that the district attorney's office can say, look, these are some of the examples where we will prosecute somebody. Yeah, just follow what happens to the end of the case. And so, what this report is about is Antifa member Phoebe Ann Loomis. I first came across her because she has a history of violent extremism in Portland going back years. This photo was from her May Day riot arrest on the 1st of May last year, 2021. But she was arrested at another May Day riot all the way back in 2017. So people might remember Portland for the months of nightly rioting we had in 2020, but the rioting continued until 2021. And she was part of a group of Antifa, up to about 100 people on May Day 2021, who attacked City Hall and then went on a rampage in downtown targeting businesses. And so she destroyed a cafe, a Starbucks. This is some of the riot gear that she was arrested with. She had on fiberglass reinforced gloves, as you can see there. By the way, one of the people who beat me in 2019 in the assault where I had the brain hemorrhage was using gloves like that. The knuckles are extremely hard. So she was arrested with that, the gas mask, helmet. She had bear mace with her. She had one of the tools here on the left is can be used to break windows. And so she was originally charged with. Let me pull up my report. And she was indicted by a grand jury, by the way. Indicted a year ago on multiple felony charges, including rioting and criminal mischief. So there was felony rioting, 2 charges of first-degree felony criminal mischief, and another charge of misdemeanor criminal mischief. So when that case, unsurprisingly, she was given a sweetheart plea deal. So she was allowed to plead no contest, which it's only a subtle difference from pleading guilty. It means basically that, well, one, you can't say that she pleaded guilty, but two, for example, she's would not be civilly liable for the crimes that she did. For example, the businesses that were hurt by her actions. But I mean, pleading no contest leads to a conviction. But here's what makes this particularly such a sweetheart deal from the Mike Schmidt's office. So she pleaded no contest to first-degree criminal mischief, which is under Oregon law a felony, but they allowed for that first-degree criminal mischief to be treated as a misdemeanor. All the other felonies would get dropped immediately, and that upon paying the restitution to Starbucks, she would be allowed to withdraw her no contest plea, and then the case is dismissed. So she would, in the legal sense, have no criminal conviction over the case. That was a sweetheart deal. So the restitution she had to pay was over $3,600. And well, over a year later, she appears to not have made that restitution. So Antifa are using Go in a fraudulent campaign, actually. Here's a screenshot of it. Phoenix Stay Free. Phoenix was the moniker, fake name that she used in her Antifa direct action. And so the campaign lies about the details of her case, and they're seeking to raise $3,000. The largest contribution so far has come from a far left extremist and former journalist named Robert Evans. I write about him in my book. He brazenly praised a terror attack in 2020 by Antifa. And he was also interviewed by the New York Times as some alleged expert on the riots. And of course, these interviews never disclose that he has these violent extremist views in support of Antifa. So yeah, you can read more details of this report um, on Daily Wire. Let me pull up some of my tweeting about this. Here we go. Yeah, so here's the GoFundMe. And there is a report function for campaigns like this, because GoFundMe, according to their own policy, does not allow for raising money for the legal aid of violent criminal suspects. She's not just a violent criminal suspect. She pleaded no contest, so she will have a conviction if she's not able to fulfill these conditions of the sweetheart plea deal. So that the reasoning that GoFundMe used last year to pull all the fundraising campaigns for Kyle Rittenhouse was they said, look, we don't allow for fundraising for those who are charged with a violent crime. Well, over and over, as in this case, as in many, many other cases in Portland, Antifa would just make an account and they'll lie about the details. They won't talk about the felony charges. They won't talk about what the indictment says that and alleges that these people did. And sometimes they raise money after the people plead guilty or are convicted. And this was my tweet from May last year. Personally, she has an Antifa tattoo on her chest right here. You can see on her upper chest the 3 arrows. This is a really extreme Antifa militant to the point where she brands herself with their logo because she's part of the gang. Okay. Another story that I worked on related to Antifa this week revolves around an Antifa site and groups that have released the address of a purported address of a Portland police officer, and there's a claim of responsibility for discreet sabotage, that's their word, on his vehicle. I mean, I wonder what that means. Did they cut his tire, cut the tire brakes? Did they do, plant a bomb? What kind of, anyways. So there was a statement talking about how their comrades, their anarchist comrades, did this attack. And then they release his address and information about his wife and the vehicles they drive. The website that they release this claim of responsibility and also information about how to target him is Rose City Counter Info. The Post Millennial censored the officer's face because, well, it's it was released in the context of a threat. But they wrote "See you soon," and let me pull up the screenshot. Here we go. So an Antifa cell in Oregon published a link to a Portland Antifa site where claims or responsibilities for attacks are published. They detail an attack on the family home of a Portland police officer on September 11 or 12. They name his wife and give the address. So the first place that posted the link with this information about Officer Andrew Hurst was from this Antifa group, Emerald Valley Anarchists. And you can see the Antifa symbol in their Twitter avatar. I censored the picture here. I'm going to read. This is from part of their post. I don't link to it for obvious reasons, and I censor out certain information, but they wrote, "To every other killer cop who sleeps peacefully, if you think we would forget the people you killed or forget our anger over time, you will find out the hard way that we always remember. Hiding in your white suburbia houses is not going to make you safe. You will never be safe. See you soon. If anyone else would like to pay a visit to Andrew Hurst, he lives with his wife, blank, in the suburbs of blank. The address is blank. They own 2 vehicles blank. So the Antifa militants are angry because, well, they're targeting Officer Andrew Hurst because he, over his years in the Portland police, have been involved in 2 officer-related killings of suspects. He was cleared of wrongdoing in both, and grand juries declined to pursue any charges against him. The one that you still see Antifa and BLM talking about a lot is a man named Quanice Hayes. He was a black male who, according to a victim, was taken hostage in a vehicle and had a gun pointed at his head. The gun turned out later to be a replica pistol, but it's a realistic looking one, as you can see in this picture that police released. And so responding police to Quanice Hayes' rampage of violence and terror, they shot him dead. And then it became Portland's BLM moment in a way. His family sued the city civilly, and the city settled for $2.1 million of taxpayer money. So, the city didn't admit to wrongdoing in the settlement, but I think because the victim fit the right boxes, mainly because he was a black male killed by an officer, the city, just gives our tax money away. In contrast, for example, the estate of Aaron Danielson, who is the Trump supporter who was murdered by an Antifa member in Portland in 2020 during the riots, they sued the city of Portland and others within the government of the city, and that case was dismissed. So the city would not settle there. So no money for Aaron Danielson's family. The congressional candidate Joe Kent, he lives in Vancouver, Washington, which is right next to Portland, believe it or not, just over the river on the Washington state side. So he reacted to my reporting about Antifa threatening and releasing the home address of an officer. So he's a Republican candidate running for District 3 in Washington State, and he's a veteran as well, and is a widower. So he wrote, Antifa is targeting police officers at their homes in our district. Antifa is a domestic terrorist organization and must be dismantled. The Democrats from the most senior levels have been supporting Antifa's campaign of terror for far too long. So Antifa in Portland are quite nervous that he has a chance to win the congressional seat. Vancouver, Washington, though very close to Portland, is much more moderate and much more conservative in some parts than Portland. And so some of the Antifa rioting in Portland in 2020 did bleed over briefly in Vancouver, but it was shut down pretty quickly by their law enforcement there, who were not under the same restrictions that were placed on law enforcement in Portland and in Oregon. So yeah, it's he has a chance to win that congressional seat, and Antifa have talked about giving opposition research to the Democrat candidate. And so, these are, that's the irony of these people who self-profess to be anarchists. They will work with institutions of the state to harm their enemies, so they have no principles. The police union in Houston also tweeted out a response to my reporting. They wrote, Antifa is a violent criminal organization. They are anarchists. Their members are a threat to safety of our communities, which they prove every day. Our prayers are with the officers that continue to protect and serve the citizens of Portland. And then they link to the federal definition of a gang, which can apply to various Antifa cells, right? And okay. By the way, I I reached out to the Portland police for a comment about what this Antifa's website posted about one of their officers, and they responded to me that they are aware of the post. That's all they would say. I asked if they um, have referred the matter to federal investigators, the FBI, given that the threat was made, it was a virtual threat. They would not, the Portland police would not respond for comment to that particular question. You know, the sad theme whenever I talk about Portland is that the city is still really struggling with the consequences that the city leadership made in 2020 after George Floyd died. You know, the consequences of demoralizing, defunding police, placing restrictions on their ability to respond to riots, creating an environment where officers quit, resigned, or transferred to other departments. And we're years out from that, but Portland is still in the midst of a historic surge in violent criminality and homicides. And you know, some of this reporting is covered in the national press. Fox News just published a report this week by Hannah Ray Lambert. Hannah Ray Lambert used to be a local reporter in Portland. She did a lot of really great video coverage in Portland back in 2020, but she's with Fox News now. And she interviewed people who are just feeling so unsafe that they have to take really serious precautions just to walk in public during the day and obviously at night. You know, there's been some research. The city council commissioned a survey that found, let's see, nearly half, 48% of 500 Portlanders who responded said they felt unsafe walking alone at night in their own neighborhood. Those who felt unsafe, 78% told researchers they were afraid of being physically assaulted. These fears are not unfounded. We've had a number of really violent attacks on members of the public by Antifa, by rioters, and of course by homeless people who live in the encampments that have just grown and taken over certain parts of the city, parts of downtown, obviously, and residential areas as well. Here's a report that went out this week in the Willamette Week, which is a local liberal paper in Portland. 3 hotels are facing foreclosure in downtown Portland. I mean, this is it's the conditions in Portland are reaching a new critical phase, you know, to the point of where the major hotels in downtown are unable to operate because people are staying away. And I think Portlanders by and large still have not really pinpointed where the blame lies. You do hear now a majority of those who are unhappy with the violent criminality and the homelessness issues. That had to happen for people to at least recognize that. But in terms of who's to blame, there's still, you know, it's a left-wing city. They just can't find themselves to blame the left-wing policies of the left-wing city council in the state. They don't want to acknowledge that we have militant far-left extremists like Antifa who have worked as bodyguards to protect these homeless encampments, to attack city workers who try to clear them out. People aren't making those connections. So, but you know, whether they make the connections or not, they're being impacted. And yeah, we'll see if it leads to anything electorally. I'm not quite sure, to be honest. You know, sometimes indoctrination can just be so strong that you can never reach a critical mass of those who are able to break out of it. Okay. I'm gonna skim some of the questions and comments right now. please send them to me right now. There's still a chance for me to get to them. While you're sending me in your last questions on a related subject to the violence in Portland, the far left have certain strongholds in certain regions of the country that maybe the wider public aren't aware of. In the South, in North Carolina, Ashland in particular has seen a 31% surge in violent crime within 5 years. This is a report by John Brown for Fox News. Asheville, if you have read my book, it's one of the strongholds for Antifa. They have chapters in organizing that happen there. A lot of leftists have moved there and colonized this lovely, beautiful part of North Carolina and have created their own political carve out. And you see it represented in who they elect for mayor, who they have on city council. They're hitting there after George Floyd died. They have a lot of rhetoric about defunding police, creating an environment where police are demoralized. And as a result, now you're seeing violent crime surge there. So they've had a lot of resignations in the Asheville Police Department as well. So the police chief, David Zack, told Fox News Digital that the reasons behind the steady flood of resignations in his department are complicated and multifaceted. Zack said the APD lost more than 100 sworn officers since May 2020, which he noted is roughly equivalent to about 600 years of experience walking out the door. So he talked about family pressures, lack of community support, and low pay. Portland, like Asheville, like many cities in America, are struggling with hiring officers that they lose. They lose every year, to those who retire, obviously. But usually the retirements, can be delayed because people will, instead of taking an early retirement, continue working and earn additional benefits that way and income. And it gives the police departments more time to recruit future replacements. We're not getting that. And part of the story talks a bit about Antifa. Chaz Nesbitt, who's a local investigative journalist, attributed some of the city's problem to Antifa's presence in Asheville. So he talks about his quote, "It's devastating what they've done here in town in the Asheville area." Activists, these so-called activists have intimidated police. They've conducted some of these needle exchange programs that have just really invited drug use and homelessness to Asheville. Here's the Firestorm bookstore, which is an Antifa bookstore. These bookstores, there are ones in Portland and in New York and many other cities, Philadelphia. They operate as one of the meeting spaces for Antifa. One of the bookstores in Portland was a secret training location for Rose City Antifa. The Firestorm bookstore has really extremist literature there. So, on the outside, it may look cute with all these animals and stuff they draw in it. But if you go in there and look at the books they have, they're calling and instructing a violent revolution or insurrection, as another word we often hear. Okay. All right. Some of the questions and comments. Somebody asked, when was Antifa invented? As I often say, I wrote about it in my book. You see it in the back there. Antifa, the very first organization, was a paramilitary of the Communist Party in Germany just before the Second World War. So its roots from the beginning have always been through violent communism. The Antifa paramilitary were involved in a lot of political violence on the streets of what was then the Weimar Republic. They helped destabilize the country. The communists were trying to incite uprisings, insurrections all over so that they could have a communist revolution in the Weimar Republic. They wanted to overthrow the state. So their actions and violence and destabilization helped pave the way for the rise of the Nazis, because then the Nazis were presenting themselves as a the other side that can solve the issues that the violent communists were doing in destabilizing society. So, I interviewed James Lindsay a couple weeks ago. He made a similar analogy. Antifa create the enemies that they say they fight. They do radicalize people. They create an environment where extremism thrives, because Antifa today, they can only, it's in the name anti, they can only exist in opposition to something. So if it's not, if there aren't enough Nazis, which there aren't enough, if there aren't enough fascists, then what do? They target Trump supporters. They target those who are against mask mandates. They target those who are against mandatory vaccinations. They target those who are critical of abortion. They target Christian churches. They target Catholic churches. So that is the history of Antifa. Okay. Somebody asked, Branahar asked, has someone followed the money on GoFundMe? It just seems very odd that they always allow funds for terrorists. I'm not sure what this questioner asked by follow the money. You can see all the donations that are there in a campaign, right? And a lot of the names will say anonymous because people tick that box, but a lot of them will be the actual names, so we can actually see, if not see who it is, and at least the number of people and the money that is being funneled through, which is better than some of these other sites, by the way, that the far left use. Some of these other ones that are less popular, they don't even tell you how many people and who's donating what. Yeah, with that, I guess maybe like what in the question or the comment, it just seems very odd that they always allow funds for terrorists. Well, GoFundMe is part of big tech. It's left wing. The people it hires are left wing. The people that they use to do content moderation, essentially, and to kick people off and ban campaigns are run by liberals and leftists. So that is a systematic bias that exists there, as exists with Twitter and YouTube and Patreon and Facebook and Instagram and all these other places. It only goes in that direction. Okay. Some comments here. Branahar also made a comment. Antifa Weathermen. It was set up by Bill Ayers. Weather Underground was a communist terrorist organization in the United States, active in the 60s and 70s. They did bombings and bombings, robberies, breaking their members out of prison. Big list of violent terrorist activities, and their members were FBI most wanted. So Antifa and the Weather Underground are not the same, but they are part of the same continuum, and they have a shared history. And Antifa actually take a lot of inspiration from the direct action that the Weather Underground did, but they also have learned from the so-called mistakes of the Weather Underground, that caused them to be arrested and dismantled and imprisoned for many, many years. And the big lesson that Antifa take is, don't organize yourself as officially a group. Make it seem like it's just a movement, that that there's no organization that actually happens, that it's just a name that means anti-fascism. And unfortunately, that propaganda has been very successful among Democrats and also in the mainstream press. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and comments. I'm going to talk about ways that you can support me. So this is my link tree, just
linktree/AndyNGO. I have a locals, and my locals is ngo.locals.com. Please join me there if you can. And I also have a Patreon and Subscribestar. You can find all of this just by searching that in like my name, Andy Ngo, but the links will be in my profile. Yeah, the support that you provide is how I'm able to continue to do my journalism. And I know now is a difficult economic time for a lot of people. So for those who support me currently, thank you. It means a lot to me. And for those who don't yet, please consider it. I also have PayPal, Cash App, and Venmo as well. Mr. Andy Ngo is my name on those if you want to give just a one-time donation. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining me on episode 25 of Weekly Notice, and I look forward to joining you next week. Thanks for sending your questions and comments. Good night, everyone.